Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Breaking Uneven podcast. We love to talk shop, uncover the beauty of failures, and play a few games. Today, we're breaking out of our usual format to talk about what it's like to build a design led brand. We have with us Rahul Reddy and Jeff Nelson from Subco, Aniruddh Mehta from Studio Big Fat, and Nupur Kejriwal from CUNA. So we'll dive straight into it.
Okay, so let's first understand the foundation, right? So Anirudh, based on your experience, could you please tell us the most basic elements required to set up a brand?
I think you need a founder who really understands design, um, who kind of, well, they don't even need to understand, but I think it's important for them to kind of respect um, how design can be integrated into a brand and how important it is. Um, I think that definitely sets off a good foundation and a good relationship, especially for when you're working with someone who's not from a design background but is starting a new brand or a product or a company. How can you work with a designer in order to kind of build something that is design led in that sense? I think that's definitely very, very important for me, at least, while building a brand.
Okay, and then, Rahul, let's talk about, coming to Subco. What were, what was something that you wanted? I mean, how did y'all work together to get into Subco? Where did y'all begin, and what did y'all create first, let's say?
Yeah, well, actually, so I think in September of 2019, around then, I think is when Rahul had reached out to me on email. Uh, and I'm usually not very good at responding back to emails. I'm so glad that I did respond back to this one. Um, but yeah, Rahul reached out to me saying that he's starting a specialty coffee roasters brand. And he said, maybe we can meet up. And I literally replied back to him the same day. We met up for a coffee. And I think one of the main things, I didn't know anything about Rahul at that point, and in fact, he was recommended to, or well, I was recommended to him by another friend for a cafe that I had kind of done some external facade design for in Juhu. Um, and that's kind of how he stumbled upon my work. Complete coincidence. He happened to kind of walk into the cafe and he saw the facade exterior design that I had done, and then he asked the founder, who's done the exteriors over here, and that's how he was recommended to me. That's how I was recommended to him, sorry. And then we met up for a coffee. Rahul gave me a kind of lowdown in terms of where he had come from, what his plans are. One of the main things that stood out to me was the name. So Rahul had come up with the name and the concept behind the cafe, and I thought that was really nice. I think that's kind of when it really clicked for me in terms of like I had already decided in that meeting that this is a project I want to work on for sure, because the name was really nice and unique. Props to Rahul for coming up with that with the name Subco. Not only is it a great name, it rolls off the tongue really well, but also like the idea behind it, Subco is like from the subcontinent for all. So there was clearly enough thought that he had put into it, and he seemed very clear in terms of what he was looking for in terms of a design partner. And that always, for me, it makes my job a lot easier when I'm working with someone who knows what they want and who are sure about in terms of like what they need to kind of what they're looking for, what the benchmark is. Makes my job a lot easier. Kind of, I just come in to execute his vision and kind of give in my inputs, and we kind of work together. So that's how it started. It was definitely the name that kicked it off for me.
Yeah, the name was 35 minutes of shower thoughts
Yeah.
was the effort that went.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if any of these guys actually know that story. Like I said, I've never actually told anyone. Well, I've not told anyone in the interview, so I think that's a little exclusive thing you guys got. So,
So we leave it at that. We leave it exclusive and for you all to kind of figure out what it was. But okay, so Rahul, what is the first thing that you and Aniruddh came up with, and how did you go about it after you spoke and both of y'all were excited? What did you do?
Oh man, you're making me really jog my memory here. But no, it's still pretty fresh. Um, yeah, as Anirudh said, I mean, we sort of we we met for no surprise, I guess, for a cup of coffee, and we discussed. I think, Ani, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way I tried to kind of convey um, Subco was exactly the way that I described it when we last spoke, Anuj and Janvi, which was what 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 is the mission of what is the mission behind the name? What does that actually encompass, and how does it play out in a stream of incidentally in the stream of products that happen to be associated with said mission, right? And then how does that product set get created in a supply chain that is hyper traceable, and wherein each node of that supply chain can actually utilize design treatment? And then how do I encompass all of that into the initial bit, which was like, okay, everyone thinks about logos, and of course we all understand why, because they are the first interface that you end up having with a brand, right? I mean, I understood that much. So I sort of said, I said, Ani, I don't know how you would envision constructing this idea, but I do feel very strongly that in order for the name to achieve its end purpose, I want to kind of focus a lot on language and diversity of language. And I sort of said, I don't know how this looks right yet in my brain. I have some thoughts, but can you help me distill down the diversity of the Indian subcontinent from a typographic and linguistic point of view, first into a logo and then into auxiliary streams of design that kind of encompass that idea. And what I said in particular was, I had been sort of weirdly, because I'm not a Bollywood person at all, but I've been weirdly inspired by one very specific aesthetic takeaway from Bollywood, maybe up to the 70s or 80s, which was that cinema at that juncture of time were oftentimes exhibiting film titles in English, in Latin script, in Hindi or Devanagari script, and in Urdu or Persian script. And broadly speaking, my takeaway from that was, of course, there's much nuance and there's too much diversity in India to encompass into one language or two languages. But broadly speaking, those languages spoke to a broad swath of the cultural legacy of the Indian subcontinent. And I felt that was appropriate to start off and kick off our design effort with.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. And, there is a lot of thinking that went into it before y'all actually started creating the elements. And of course, the most basic to start off with is the logo and then all the auxiliary. But then it doesn't stop there either, right? Because it's a design-led brand, it goes so much beyond that. So, like, let's get another example, right? So, Nupur, when you consider the branding for Kiona, right? In what ways do you go beyond just the story, the logo, the typeface, and everything? And why do you call it a design-led brand?
So the whole, so Kiona, the whole ethos for it is to take art off your wall and onto your bed. So, that's what we follow. And what we realized is that globally, when we were doing our research before we started the brand, was that to find aesthetically pleasing, like good design bed sheets were really scarce. So that's where the whole idea came out for us. And that actually, so for us, the whole branding also came from the fact that we were going to be so design heavy, which is why if you look at our branding, it's quite minimal because we wanted the focus to be on the designs. So that's the way that we're doing. So we collaborated with like 14 different designers, and each of them have something different that they've brought to Kiona because we wanted to make sure that there was something for everyone in our designs, so like even an eclectic person and even someone who's really muted.
Yeah, I think for a brand that, is almost like an umbrella for multiple styles and multiple designers and multiple artists, I think it's important for the brand itself, the design of the brand, or the branding for it should not compete with the various multiple design styles. So
Exactly.
it has to be kind of subdued and minimal in order for all the products and all the various artists that it's going to showcase for that to kind of flourish.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I think like before we move on to the part of like how it goes from foundation to like every day, I'm just curious to know, Anirudh, that when like people come to you with like concepts, like a lot of people don't necessarily have the design intellect, not intellect, but like the way of thinking as you do. So, like, for example, if Rahul has come to you with like the idea behind Subco and they like literally just like vomits all his ideas, how do you like put that into a design and how do you organize that for it to make sense into
Yeah,
a brand?
sure. So I think, I mean, definitely, I I always think of like a Rahul almost he is a designer, but he doesn't actually use the tools. He doesn't design himself. So a lot of like his thoughts come from like a lot of discussions that we have are very design thinking. So he's almost like I would say something like a design strategist for the brand. Um, but in terms of kind of funneling things down, it's always really nice to work, at the beginning or the initial kind of brand building for Subco. It was just me and Rahul working towards it, and we had another associate, Karthik, who was also a part of the team. And it was really nice because I think the smaller the team is, it's easier to build something. There's not a massive chain of communication that you have to go down, and things sometimes often get lost in those in longer kind of networks of chains like those. So working one on one with Rahul, it was much easier to do so. And I think one of the main things is we had kind of decided right from the beginning that we're not making something that I like, and we're not making something that he likes. We need to make something that does justice to the brand. So we should never kind of get our ego in the way in terms of like, if Rahul has an idea, I could very openly tell him like, that's a really shit one. I don't think that's going to work. Or he would come back and tell me the same thing. So that was great. We'd never take each other's ideas personally. I think that kind of open communication really helps solidify certain things. And yeah, it was very different compared to like working on a lot of other brands. But like I said, even though he might not be a designer, he was able to kind of funnel down his thoughts and had a very clear idea in terms of what we wanted in a logo as well. Even the idea of like the tri-script lockup, which is inspired by a lot of like Bollywood film posters, vintage posters, to have something so subtle over there, like a really nice subtle nod to the industry. Um, I think that itself was like a really great idea. And even though that was the idea, we did not want to kind of execute it and add a lot more kind of design heavy things to it. It needed to be just simplified. And we understood that the powerful thing about that is literally just a tri-script lockup. We don't need to add any more additional flourishments or embellishments into that unit. So even though we had worked on various options and ideas, we kind of just gravitated back towards the simplicity of what that lockup was and how that kind of helps enable the storytelling of the brand. And the only kind of small thing that we added was, because there were two kind of parts to the brand, which is the bake house and the specialty coffee roasters. In the center, between the two smaller scripts, we had two kind of motifs. One represented the bakehouse and one represented the coffee roasters. And I think that was a really nice kind of subtle touch that we again simplified it down to what that how that could work for a brand that has multiple verticals. So tomorrow, if they expand, it's as simple as kind of just changing that motif to something else. So it simplifies expansion as well for the future.
Yeah, like I feel like when you look at it just in terms of a viewer, it's so much different to like the intricate details that go behind putting together like even a logo, or to look at it in terms of longevity and not just like in one particular state. So yeah, like that actually goes really well with like the next part of our conversation. Like given after setting up like the brand and things like that, how does it work from there? And Jeff, which of the design thinking principles do you use on like an everyday basis for your role? For example, the customer satisfaction scorecard for your products and things like that. Like how do you integrate this on a daily basis?
Hey, chronologically, I kind of joined Subco, Rahul, and the rest of the team, probably 6 months into the lockdown. The way that kind of happened was, previously, my experience was in like events, brand consultancy. On the side, I would do music. Um,
Really
and
sick, really sick music, by the way. Shout out.
So it was lockdown, and I was freelancing at that point. I was kind of visiting home with absolutely no scope. There was a lot of uncertainty going on around that time. And I was speaking to Aniruddh, about like what's happening in the in the design industry, on the freelance side of scope of things, and all of that. And I know this was around the time when he had just finished working on Subco, and I was back home, and I saw this page come up, and I saw this Mason and Co. Chocolate bar, which was I think one of the first collaborations Subco had done back in the day, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Like for a brand to just kind of like, born into the pandemic, and you already have like this Mason and Co. sort of co-branded chocolate, which was super interesting. Definitely gravitated towards everything they were doing back then itself. Was speaking to Ani, and he told me, hey, why don't you guys get in touch? I don't know if there's anything there. Just given, on F&B, I have nothing, on paper, I have nothing to do with F&B. Um, so I got speaking to Rahul, and it turned out to be like this 4 hour long discussion, which was supposed to be like our intro chat.
Yeah.
We literally spoke about everything from design to the subculture side of things, which is obviously Subco's in-house focus beyond bread and coffee. Um, Spoke about that, spoke about content, photography, everything that was still in nature Subco, but was separate from bread and coffee, you know. Um, so that conversation was quite inspiring. Again, to go back to Aniruddh's point, like as a founder, I think for me that was something that was refreshing to see someone taking so much interest into it, and also sort of extending that support for someone like me to kind of step into the F&B industry and kind of practice it in some sense. Um, so it kind of started from there. I moved back to Bombay in September 2020, and back then, like we were a small team of designers, probably like two designer,
One design.
one designer
Yeah.
working part time. It would be me and Raul on Instagram,
Yeah.
like doing the stories, doing the customer queries, all of it. Um, and
Yeah.
then it kind of like started from there, right?
Yeah. I think um, guys, where Jeff kind of comes into the picture or came into the picture here, I'd like to zoom out for a moment just to kind of address your question, initial question, which was why does someone like me who's building, ostensibly a cafe at the time, or a coffee business, or a bakery, or any of those things, all of which are true, right? Um, why am I spending so much time thinking about a music producer who takes really great photographs, who hasn't been involved in brand consultancy? Where does he fit, right? Like why does that even matter for something like this? And it kind of distilled down to a fundamental decision, which was after Aniruddh and I kind of he obviously runs an agency. He has other clients. He said, look, Rahul, I'll support you in whatever way I can, but I'm super happy with the results here, but I have other things to do. I have other work. So I said, okay, so how do I, no, not in like a bad way, but essentially he said, hey, dude, I have other projects too, so like, let me know how I can help you, but on a day-to-day basis. Basically, I knew that Anirudh would not be, as much as I would have liked, available to kind of consult with on a daily basis on how to build brand with him, right? He'd already done, I think, his part in helping me get there. So on that basis, I had a decision to make, which was naturally when you're in my position and you're building a consumer brand, you're thinking a lot about. Um, I guess traditionally people are thinking a lot about marketing. They're thinking about conversions. They're thinking about all sorts of metrics as to how your either your products or your packaging or whatever converts into sales, right? I mean, ultimately that's how people understand marketing for the most part. I think the big difference that I guess I've distilled down now, and I didn't really realize it so much in the moment, um, was that my work with Anirudh and the sort of inspiration that I gained from, and thanks for the nice words earlier, by the way, Anirudh, but about the way that I operate and I think, but I sort of started to realize that through the process. I mean, I learned so much from working with Anirudh on the brand build that I also realized that, hey, maybe part of my contribution to building Subco is to make Subco into an ecosystem brand, which meant that essentially the creative side of my brain, whatever it was, along with a set of really key contributors, could be utilized to build Subco into something that was much more than the sum of its product parts, right? And that's where someone like Jeff kind of came into the picture, where I said, I don't know exactly what we're going to do together yet, Jeff, but like I know what you can bring to the table in terms of understanding the culture that we're trying to create with the brand and understanding how Anirudh's sort of legacy that he kind of left us could be picked up and then um, layered upon with more and more complexity, more and more iterations, more and more, uh, more and more creativity. I mean, it really, that was sort of the baseline. So I looked at everything Ani had done as a baseline, and I said, Jeff, along with what became a growing team, which is now, in fact, six individuals on our team who just work on the creative side of Subco exclusively. Essentially, we decided to create our own internal agency. That's what happened.
I think that's the really important thing, right? Because had had it just been had it been a case of me handing over the initial design work and everything that we had kind of built in terms of like a visual identity, handing that over and and the subco team just using solely that, I don't think the brand would have worked as well. I think it's important to kind of take that almost as building blocks and then to keep developing and keep developing. In fact, a lot of things that are seen today on Subco's socials, it's a lot of that is not even what I've made or thought of back then, but it's so nice to see it evolve, and you can tell when a designer has made something, whether it's an Instagram post or has taken a photograph or something, or even when it comes to even like certain video posts, Jeff actually sits and makes the sound design for those posts. So that level of intricacy and detail, no brand cares about that. Like, why would they? Why, what? It's so much easier to kind of just go online and just get a soundtrack and pay like a couple of dollars and just use that soundtrack. But the fact that like someone has actually sat and made the soundtrack for a particular video about like a launch in the bakehouse, I mean, that level of depth, you can only it'll only come from like the love for the brand. Otherwise it's just a job. You can use any video, you can like use any audio. So I think what's really nice is to just to tie it back together, is that to take those design elements and look at it as building blocks, and in order to like see where will this be a year from now, 2 years from now, how can we kind of develop it more and more and more. And I think the design team that's there at Subco, they've done a fantastic job with that. And I think that's how, yeah, because nothing is templatized. There are no templates. It's unconventional way for a coffee shop to work, or for a coffee and specialty coffee roasters and a bakehouse, completely unconventional way of working. And that kind of disruption usually only happens when you have someone who's kind of coming in from the outside and trying things out, messing up, reworking it, looking at it from a completely different lens. Only then you have like a brand like this, which is doing it differently.
And just one last detail on that before, guys, if I may. And this is again where like Jeff and others on the team have been so critical to the effort. Is that I made another decision. It's actually not a decision. It was just very natural for me to do it this way, which was I didn't want Subco to be personalized. I didn't want it to be about me or about Daniel. These are things that I think oftentimes in consumer brand world, especially in the food and beverage industry, there tends to be an idol and a sort of almost an idol worship associated with people that are, let's say, chefs or professional, coffee tasters or roasters or whatever it is. And as much as that, I'm here on this podcast because you guys were kind enough to ask me to join, as well as Jeff. But I've never wanted the brand. I always felt that from the zest for caring about the brand point of view, there needed to be a disconnect between what the brand needed and what it stood for, and me, because I am there, and I will always do everything I can for the brand to take care of it and to see it through difficult periods and everything else, but and direct it. But I really believe that the brand has not been built alone by me, and I like to emphasize that in every avenue that I can. Initially it was me and Aniruddh, now it's me, Aniruddh, Jeff, and a bunch of designers, as well as our entire operations team. The thing you'll notice, and then Jeff can chime in, is we really involve people across different, in a very interdisciplinary way, to often come up with a lot of our concepts. So we talk to operations teams, we talk to people that are essentially professionals at brewing coffee that don't really know much on paper about brand building or about designing or about any of that. And Jeff is, just from standing behind the bar with some of these guys, they've come up with really cool ideas on a certain lens to capture coffee falling out of a spout that you might not have thought about if you didn't actually interact in an interdisciplinary manner. And that, I think that's possible when a founder also says, hey, I have a very strong vision, but I also want to disconnect myself and make it about a vision on its own.
Yes, definitely. I think that I, as you said, that it doesn't necessarily have to be about like a particular person, but about the whole brand as a whole. And that definitely comes from like the design aspect of how everything's portrayed and put together. And I think like when brands are design led, a lot of decisions come from how that's going to be represented. So like Nupur, at a business and partnership level, how do you decide the opportunities to pursue for CUNA?
Um, so just because we're so heavily into collaboration, right? Like that's just the idea for Kiona going forward. Like it has always been it. That so from a design perspective, it's always going to be collaborative work. Whatever we do, it's just collaboration, collaboration. We're never, or at least, okay, like Anuj says, never say never. But we don't envision having a design team in house for doing any of our products. That's not what Kiona was built on. So it also comes from just like growing up with the thought process of that collaboration is the key. Otherwise you sort of get stuck in one kind of a zone, especially when you're running a brand, which I've seen happen with Curious, for example. But like there it's okay because there it needed to be a particular kind of a thing. But with Kiona, where you like, I don't want to call out brand names, but like, I don't want to have an aesthetic where I'm like, okay, this is what it is. Like Good Earth has a sort of aesthetic. It's great, but it has a certain kind of aesthetic. We don't want that to be with Kiona. So there is, from a design perspective, it's always going to be collaborative. And we're just looking at the moment, we're only looking at like home linen. So we will come up with more products in that space. So there'll be like you can expect table linen, wallpapers, hopefully even upholstery at some point. So yeah, and global brand focuses on global brand, homegrown but global.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, like the idea of like a lot of brands now. But when you talk about collaborating, how do you decide on like a particular designer or particular person that you would want to collaborate on that can be a part of CUNA, even though it's not the same aesthetic, even though you're trying to get it differentiated enough, but to be part of one umbrella? How does that work?
So we work with a studio called November. So Juhi and Shiva are our curators. They, but again, with them also, it's a very collaborative effort, you know. So it's the team at Kiona plus Shiva Juhi. They come up with the collections. Like we have different collections, so they sort of come up with what that collection could be, and then all of us, like, we keep sharing artists. Like it's an ongoing process. It's been a year since we started
Yeah.
working on Kiona, and our artist list already is in the hundreds of just people that we would want to at some point work with. So it really depends on the kind of collection, and then which designer we think can work within that particular collection. So it's definitely based on the designer's strength as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's their aesthetic that we want to bring, and we of course curate it in a way to ensure that it doesn't clash, like within a collection or within the same, like, when a product is released, they don't clash with each other. That's the whole aspect of curation also, so that we don't choose designers with the same aesthetic for the same collection.
And Rahul, how about for Subco? I know, like from our previous conversation, there's like a lot of thought you put into like every decision you make. So, what is your thought process behind collaborating and working with different businesses and partnerships?
That's that's a good one. I think me and Jeff can both probably answer this. Jeff, you want to go first? How do you see it?
So just on the topic of collaboration, I would start internally first because since I mentioned we're a group of 6 designers now, everyone comes with very different like specialized skill sets as well. Someone's really good at animation, someone's really good like at web layout, someone's really good at like hand-drawn illustrations. So on the onset itself, like we're really like heavy on like internal collaborative processes because we feel like we get to see where each of these strong points kind of complement each other, you know. So it kind of begins there, and then going to partners, um, I feel there are a couple of things we look at. One is obviously, the subcontinental side of things that we're looking at, how
Yeah. I mean,
ingrained that brand is, and also how the partner's brand kind of talks about that.
I guess yeah, that's a good starting point. I mean, I think there are always exceptions, of course, but I think what Nupur said kind of resonated exactly with me. In fact, because I think there's a nexus that is a growing nexus. It's still limited fairly, but I think it's certainly being viewed as not only the right thing to do, but also a commercially viable thing to do, which is um, kind of focusing on the quote unquote homegrown, side of supply chain, brand building, etc. Whilst also displaying that we are living in an interconnected global marketplace and figuring out how those two things collide and how there's a set of brands. I would aspire to hope that we fit into this category, but what I would say is to complement some others would be folks, for example, in I think the gin space these days are doing a very special job of kind of creating a categorization for Indian botanicals and gin in a way that is at once local and native, and at the same time really can hold their own on a sort of global platform. And I fashion Subco in that light, and I always have. And I think when we think about collaborating, I think having that layer of thought is quite important for us when we decide to do something with somebody. Of course, there are some exceptions, but I think that is really critical. And I think other than that, Jeff, I mean, I think you probably agree that um, we are heavily, curatorial here, not in an exclusionary way, but in a way that, again, there's not a lot of interest in our personal opinions most of the time. I think a lot of us are very, very clear on what we believe uh, organically fits with with the brand's mission, and hence that naturally would probably mean that a brand that has a strong visual and design driven identity of its own would probably be a natural ally to the brand that we're building. And I don't think that's very exclusionary. I think it's just testament to what those individuals are doing, and the fact that we believe that we kind of coexist in the frame of mind of similar consumers. So I think that's the way that I see it.
And just to add to that, it's something that we've kind of ingrained in the way we do sort of collaborations. Is we just didn't want to do collaborations for namesake to kind of like keep two logos on a creative and call it a collaboration. It needed to be thought through much more deeper, and the narratives and the story that was being built for this collaboration, for any collaboration, needed to be spoken about. And I feel like that sort of extensive approach that sort of spans across design and sort of narrative building, and eventually the byproduct of the collaboration is kind of like what ties it in all together. And I think that's what we're really interested in and looking for when we look for collaborations, or potentially partner with somebody.
I think looking at like companies from a different perspective, like when you like look at it from a design perspective, all your decisions are so different and things like that. So it makes it more interesting to learn how like decisions are made when it comes to either collaborating or even looking at things that are difficult on a day-to-day basis.
So, earlier you mentioned the idea of uh, templatization and everything, right? So, I'll tell you what my understanding is, and then please correct me if I'm wrong, and then give me your take on it. When you create that kind of a heavily curated brand for someone, and there's a lot of thought into it, and that thought needs to evolve, as you said. It can't be what you create on day one and hand over, and then that's it. Um, but unlike Subco, which has put thought into the brand and had like creative designers on board to evolve it, there are a lot of brands out there who prefer the templatized thing that they can hand over to someone whose sole job is to put out content, etc., and the more generic, traditional way of marketing. So, what are the difficulties that you face? How do you feel when you see a brand that you've created and it's not evolving? It's not exactly what you envisioned it to be. How does that work? How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean it's tricky, right? I mean there's a lot of like financial along with that there's a lot of time that's needed, a lot of effort and time that's needed, to even actually build a design team, to even like kind of get the right people involved, because usually designers and illustrators, they want to work at a design studio. So that itself, like overcoming that hurdle itself is a challenge. Like how do you hire people who are like kind of either in their maybe a couple of years into design, or maybe who are just fresh out of college, as subco, how do you kind of hire someone who is a designer? So that itself is a challenge. I think for brands that manage to kind of cross that hurdle, it, you can clearly see the difference in terms of how evolved that design language is, or how things can kind of change over the years. Um, but I think working with templates and working with like the usual kind of marketing tools, for example, like why don't we do one thing? Why don't we just kind of make this nice kind of box and send it out to influencers who can post about it? I mean, that itself, the idea of that, it's like this super low hanging fruit that itself, I mean, personally, I'm not a fan of that kind of marketing. I feel like it's like the most easiest kind of way to, like, how do you spread the message? And those are not the right people to spread that message, and they're doing that for like hundreds of other brands. So you're just going to get lost in the sea of like these influencers showcasing your products. So I don't know if that really works that well. Perhaps it does for some brands, but I personally don't think that that's the most optimum way to kind of market someone. I remember having conversations about this with Rahul, and we kind of aligned on that same thought, because they haven't spent any kind of no purchase, no like sponsored posts, no nothing. It was completely organic. Like the growth of the brand has been strictly organic since day one. Like I don't think till today they've done a sponsored post,
No,
or they've sent out like
Oh,
or
wow.
they've sent out like influencer based kind of packaging
but this
thing.
is it's
So
funny, Anirudh, like people don't like they actually genuinely don't believe me when I tell them this. They're like, this guy's full of shit. Like he's got to be lying.
Yeah, because y'all have been viral.
No, so we
Y'all
so
have
we
been
just.
viral. So
I mean, I was.
so
I remember. Yeah, go ahead, Anirudh.
sorry, I'll let you complete and I'll go after you.
No, no, I was just saying. I distinctly remember. I think me and Jeff was sitting inside of Subco Bandra, like in the maybe a month or two after he had joined us, and really like depressing time period, right? I mean, nobody was really leaving their house. There was a few people coming to like see what the hell this random place was in the by lanes of Chapel Road, and we'd be super like I'd be thrilled every time someone came into the door. I'd be like, oh my god, like let me serve you some coffee. And so then I was sitting there thinking, shit, I guess now is the time where we got to pull the trigger. We got to start putting out sponsored content, and again, I preface this by saying there's nothing wrong at all with boosting content. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but for whatever reason, I personally felt at that time period that it wasn't the right time. I felt that the beginnings of our brand had to be incredibly airtight in their organic uh, value building and value system creation. So I thought, okay, maybe down the line there'll be a time where we are accessing a new market, maybe a new country or something like that, where of course boosting and sponsoring content might make sense. But I thought that the beginnings of real, genuine love and affinity for something someone is trying to create were best served um, were best served organic.
I think to like distill down to like something for this to be like distilled down to something very simple. I remember like having a conversation about this, like the only way to kind of get an organic traction, or for it to reach the right people, is people love posting Instagram stories. They will end up doing that the right way. And I remember even while designing the actual packaging, the coffee box, uh, literally the packaging of Subco, everything, in fact, like the the entire like visual identity and like the branding and everything apart from the logo, everything started from the coffee box. It started from that one label. So the idea was to kind of, let's make the best looking coffee box that we feel, the best looking packaging that we kind of believe does justice and represents Subco as a brand correctly. Like, how can we make this one item do all the talking for us? Like, it needs to completely, in a very wholesome way, represent the brand. And everything kind of started from there. And, to kind of design this, the idea to even do a box itself was like, like a really long conversation. Like,
Wasn't doing boxes at all in coffee at the time in India. So
yeah,
I mean
it's
that
just a different medium, right? That itself differentiates you. Like as soon as you take a different medium, how do you like change like the actual like physicality of the object? Like how do you create like this nice object? Because before you taste the coffee, that's the thing that you're gonna gravitate towards is the packaging. I mean, this is like the basis of all kind of packaging design. Um, how do you build a nice looking object? How do you think of, is this something that someone would like to gift somebody? So these kind of
to
basic
expand on that, Ani,
parameters.
and I think Jeff can also chime in on the difficulty here, like the stubbornness with which, see, Ani initially was like, I agreed fully with his approach. We created these beautiful, ticket stub. We talked about being inspired by sort of the Indian railways and the kind of old school cinema tickets of India, and that's sort of where that border came along and stuff like that, the zigzags. But the funny thing is, I was like, when we started kind of seeing traction for the coffee beans, the obvious thing to do at that point was to be like, wait a second, I mean, all this screen printing stuff is just too much trouble, right? Because it's not possible to, on paper, and in the beginning, Jeff had to go through a lot of this pain on his end at some stage, which was like, okay, screen printing is cool when you're releasing a limited edition poster or a few tote bags or a shirt, and it's good and it gives you depth and it gives you tactility. But I mean, how do you do that for a brand that wants to, aspires to sell thousands of boxes of coffee? And the obvious thing was to create a digital version of this sticker. But I was incredibly stubborn about this, and we talked a lot about it, and we tried printing a bunch of digital versions of the sticker, and it never felt good enough, and so hence we never abandoned it, and we kept trying and trying and trying to figure out how do we help resurrect in our own very tiny way, resurrect this sort of dying art of screen printing through a consumer brand. And for me, that started to feel again like a mission. It felt like something important, and it felt like something that needed to stay. So it stayed, and we figured it out.
Yeah, I think it's not easy staying true to the brand, right? And especially when you have that level of dedication to the design thinking. And I think Nupur, and you'll know this because with Subco, of course, they've done everything organically. With Kiona, I know you've done a bit of sponsored content, which is also not easy, right? It needs to be heavily curated in itself. But overall, what
It's
is the biggest
difficult, yeah.
challenge so what is the biggest challenge that you faced with Kiona and trying to stay true to the brand? How does that kind of make it difficult for everyday tasks?
I think one of the biggest things has also been just consumer mindset. Like having to talk. So, like, we've done a bunch of exhibitions now, and it's picking up, but just explaining to people, because there's just so much mentality of wanting to sleep on white bed sheet in India. Like, people have this thing where they'll just change their bed sheet and everything. That when we're talking to them, where we're talking about our product from a functional perspective of the fabric, but we're also telling them that, so what, and and why not? Like, from Kiona, like, why not? Like, why not sleep on something? Like, what is the difference? So I think that for us has been the biggest challenge in staying true to the brand as well, because we are having to think about introducing some essentials of sorts, like, which are just solid colors, because there is a demand for it. But at the core of it, we're still design, right? So the way that we are looking at our essentials is also unusual colors that are not generally available, because we do understand that, okay, a solid bedsheet in an unusual color is also still design.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's
I think
just
also,
a different kind
yeah, I
of
think
design.
absolutely. I think with the Kiona, it's also that, if there are like these kind of essential lines, I think people can actually take the liberty to like pair one thing with another. So you can have a solid mixed with like an artist's, design pillow or like a blanket or a throw. So I think that opens up like a whole kind of new world of
Exactly.
possibilities in terms of mixing and matching personalization, which is really nice.
And in
Yeah,
fact,
but that was a challenge, though. That was a very big
interestingly
challenge
enough,
in terms of, like, rethinking of what design means to all of us.
Hmm.
yeah, and interestingly enough, I think Nupur, you might be able to shed some more light, but Aniruddh's design for Kiona, the duvet or the quilt is something that people quite like to pair with one of, I think, plain whites or something you were saying.
Okay.
But again, that's
Black.
black. Sorry, yeah. So it's tough, like with Subco trying to stay true to that packaging, and then Kiona trying to stay true to the fact that this was what was designed, but you want to
Yeah.
consume it in this manner. So okay, how do we make that happen? How do we bridge that gap or whatever?
Yeah. What is the
Um,
most feasible? Yeah.
exactly. But Jeff, why don't you just tell us what is the biggest opportunity that Subco has had to let go of because it wasn't, because of it wasn't for the design or the thinking, just wasn't for Subco?
Well, very not too many actually. I think the problem we face is we get so ambitious with what's thrown at us and what we get interested in. I think we have a problem of saying yes to many things, but it's also about like carefully treading through all of it, and actually coming up with something that we are genuinely happy as a team to showcase. Um, yeah.
I think, yeah. I mean, to add to that, I think it's the sort of proverbial coin has two sides, right? I mean, one is when we do get into the process of collaborating or taking on projects that are not core to the sort of business, which tends to be quite quite frequently after a lot of curation, it is still down to that. We do engulf ourselves completely into it, and we sort of treat like we've had collaborations with brands that I won't name that where the brand, honestly, we love them and they had no real idea what to do in building this kind of collaborating framework. And we love what they do. We love their core product. We might even love their design framework. But the reality became, okay, me, Jeff, a couple of other people, they sort of started leaning on us to kind of help guide that and put in the effort to kind of think think about how a consumer or a person, anyone, interprets the two brands interacting and what that means visually, what that means in terms of language, etc. So I think we've kind of, in a weird way, we've, I guess, given ourselves a nice problem there. But I think the only thing I would add to answer the question about the biggest sort of missed opportunity, etc., is I think the challenge for me, guys, is and it's a real challenge, and I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. But where do I have this definitely developed an incredible like passion for all things design, all things creative, Aniruddh's work, Jeff's work, all of our graphic designers. It's I mean, it's very, very close to me, and Jeff knows how much time I put into it. But it also means that, in order to kind of triage or like put a moat around the brand, it means that I'm giving up a lot of revenue opportunities that come our way. And I think this is something that I think is very interesting and challenging for me, because what it means is that if we provide the wrong kind of platforms, distribution, access to the brand, no matter what we've done on the creative side, it kind of reduces the impact of what we're trying to do. And I think that staying true to the brand is not just a question of materiality and commitment to design. It's also a question of what is a sound business decision which considers that as much as possible while also understanding the revenue realities of keeping a commercial operation running. So I think that's been the trickiest thing for me.
Nupur, what about you? Have you seen that with Kiona, like where you've had to let go of certain revenue opportunities just because it wasn't the right manner for Kiona?
I think we're still too young. So I don't think we've had that at the moment. But we did have a missed opportunity where we we had an artist on board and her design was beautiful. It was stunning. Unfortunately, it did not translate well onto the fabric. So, and it was like this really nice gradient thing that she'd done, which we're still trying. We're still constantly trying to see if we can, it's like we're trying to see if we can make it happen with experimenting with other printers and stuff, because I definitely think it's one of those not solid, like it's still design, but it's still in that realm of one color palette kind of a thing. It's like a really beautiful gradient thing that she did, and we're still trying to see if we can make it work. But yeah, I do definitely think that was a missed opportunity for us in the starting, because that would have done well for sure.
Fair enough. So, let's play a quick game just to, get a few quick ideas. Rahul, you're used to this by now, so
Yeah.
I'll hand over to Janvi for the rapid fire.
Yes, we've had an amazing discussion so far, but this is more for quick answers. What I'll do is I have questions for each one of y'all, and I'll just say it, and y'all have to give rapid answers. So let's start. Jeff, sound as color or Subco coffee?
Subco coffee.
Just because Rahul's next to you. Just because Rahul's on the screen.
Yeah, that's one.
Subco has been the most
You should
active out of every profile I'm handling on Instagram, so it has to be Subco coffee, you know.
Aniruddh, your favorite project till date?
Oh my God, do I have to again say Sabka Coffee? You know, honestly, it is. It is definitely one of my favorite projects to date
Okay. Rahul, your favorite
in this space.
aspect of Subco's branding?
Not pay anybody for that answer, huh?
Yeah, Rahul, remember when you said Subco doesn't do sponsored content? Are you sure?
One exception.
I'll be
Aniruddh.
sending you the invoice shortly.
Rahul, your favorite aspect of Subco's branding?
Giving new life to indigenous typography.
Nupur, your favorite Cuna product?
Oh my God. I would have to. I would have to say Golconda's green quilt. It's a team favorite. It's just a stunning color, and I mean the design, of course, but that color is just yeah.
Okay. Aniruddh, why might you say no to a brief?
Most likely because I haven't replied to the email. That's probably it. Not because yeah. I'm pretty bad when it comes to checking emails. So I think I'll go with that. Safe.
Nupur, would you rather have great design and mediocre fabric or great fabric and mediocre design?
Ooh.
Tough.
Great design, mediocre fabric.
Okay. True to the design, but Jeff, one thing you don't like about your job?
Tough one, yeah.
Pull
Let's
out the
see.
list.
Other than working with me. Sorry about that.
That's right. One thing I don't like about my job, let's say, it's tough. I don't know, it feels pretty accessible. Sorry,
I know what it is.
I don't have. I'm actually like very invested in the brand. I I don't know if that answers your question, but I kind of do treat it as my own. So at least for what I sort of participate in. Yeah.
I'll answer for
Sorry.
him.
I
It's
still want to know
basically
Aniruddh's answer.
I'll
Yeah.
I'll answer. Yeah. It's just unlimited access to all the croissants and all the bakehouse stuff. And I'm telling you, it's tough. That's the one thing.
That's
He
the one
loves
thing
it and
you
hates
don't like
it.
about my job, actually.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a lot of people that don't like that about your job. Rahul, if not Subco, what would you do?
Oh man.
That's a good one.
At this point, I can't imagine it anymore. But
You'll be a graphic designer.
I'd probably go to design school and try to figure out how to put whatever's been in my brain to practical use. Although I don't think I would ever be. I don't think I have the technical mindset to be a designer. But I think I'd probably, knowing what I know about myself now, I guess I'd probably venture into some sort of a creative strategy sort of role, maybe in the non-profit and impact sector, so that I could help create identities for causes that would really engage people.
That's really cool, and hopefully you still do that at some point in your life. But that should be interesting to see.
In fact, we have a very, very early stage thing we call Umeed, and we've sort of, which means hope, and me and Jeff started playing with it, where we engaged with one charitable organization one time in the middle of the pandemic, but we hope to resurrect it soon. So stay tuned for that.
That concludes our rapid fire segment, bringing us to the end of our conversation. So thank you so much for all the discussion and all the thoughts on design. It's been truly enlightening. I myself wasn't that I haven't like done a lot of behind the scenes with like design and things like that, but like just to learn about how a brand is built has been like truly inspiring and interesting. So thank you.
I am curious about knowing what's the coffee that Aniruddh and Rahul met over, because
We'll tell you
Subco
off the
wasn't
podcast.
announced.
Yeah.
Off the podcast.